Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Hi, welcome to this session with myself, Tim Daley, and my colleague, Gregory, and we'll be talking about building better public services and making tech work for users. And we'll cover off a bunch of different things around our experiences and how we think that tech plays an important part in delivering good public services. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about who we are. So we're a Welsh SME. We founded about 5 years ago, based in Swansea, but we've got teams all over Wales. We're very much focused on delivering good services across Wales in particular. We've obviously done a lot of work wider than that over the last X number of years of our careers. So we spent a lot of time working in public sector and prior to starting Perago, and we continue to want to make sure that our focus for us is definitely on public services, because we think there's so much more to be done to make those better for users. Next slide, please. Importantly, we know that when we talk about this, digital change is more than technology. It's about everything. It's about the users, the organization shape, the people who work in it, the skills and capabilities. But importantly, it is very much still also about technology. You can't have digital without the right kind of technology. It is about exploiting internet era. And the things that we do across Perago, we generally split into different categories. So we can either analyze and advise teams to get a better understanding of the challenges they face and what options there are to improve their services. We can deliver services for people, and we've got plenty of experience of hands-on delivery of creating great products and services for teams across the public sector and wider. And one of the things we like to do in addition that makes us a little bit different is we actually try and build capability for teams while we do that. So we want to make sure that we do skills transfer, we mentor people, and we advise teams and individuals about how to make the most of the internet era and the kind of technologies and services that are possible that maybe weren't possible in some instances, only months ago. Next slide, please. So here's just some of the people we've worked with, and we might refer to things that people will see as familiar when we go through some of this. So we've worked our experiences. We've been in Westminster government, public sector organisations, both client side and working for them over the years, as well as lots of SMEs. We're supporting lots of local authorities and Welsh public sector, and more recently, we've been supporting organisations within arm's length bodies like CDPS, the Centre for Digital Public Services, to set up to be able to drive and accelerate at more pace the kinds of digital changes that we need to see. But as you can see, there's a wide range of experiences that we draw on to talk about the sort of things we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. So a bit of context. Like I mentioned there's been a massive uptake in grasping the potential for digital technology, and in particular for those public services across Wales. And this is basically exemplified by a digital strategy for Wales being published that breaks things down, focuses on digital services, but actually shows all of the areas that are required, in a kind of infinity loop, supporting each other to make that thing happen. So you can't have better digital services unless you have the digital skills. You can't have good services for everyone unless you make sure they're inclusive. And like I mentioned, technology is so important. because you can't have digital services unless you can have the right connectivity and you can make the data flow in different ways than you have done in the past, or people can share data in a different way. And all of that's based on a digital economy, which it requires the kind of skills that people need to be able to do these jobs as well, and using the private sector to be able to support the public sector to make those massive leaps that are required. So there's an action plan that sits behind this, and there are an enormous amount of new initiatives coming out, and it's an enormous task. We'll talk about some of the things that make it an enormous task over the next few minutes. Next slide, please. So where I wanted to start with is we've helped the Centre for Digital Public Services develop a set of service standards, as they're known, for building good digital services. And these are led out of the Centre for Digital Public Services. But as you can see, they cover the creation of any service for any organisation. They're built on the brilliant work done internationally and across GDS, Scottish Digital, and other. So we've taken the best of what's worked across there and decided to try and work out what makes Wales different and unique about how we can make this work. Because this is about wider public sector use and digital, but in Wales. And Wales has a different landscape to be able to do that. So the stuff that's the same, good digital practice, good data, good technology, building good teams, all of that kind of stuff, being agile, incremental and iterative in your delivery, that doesn't need to be improved and isn't unique to Wales. That's how we make it work well in Wales. But the bit about focusing on user needs, in particular, an obvious one is Welsh language and how we make sure that Welsh language features heavily in those services, and we make sure that people have the ability an equal ability to be able to serve themselves using the language of their choice in Wales. And secondly, a bit controversial in some respects, and we've had quite a bit of discussion around this, actually focusing on the future well-being of future generations in Wales is something quite unique to what is happening, certainly across the wider UK. We don't actually think that the user need is everything. We want it to be part of what you do. Of course, there's a laser-like focus on meeting the person who needs to do that service, but not at any cost. And therefore, we want to make sure that people think about how their decisions also impact on things like climate. It's really important that we don't decide that the user need trumps any other needs. And actually the needs, we've seen over the last 18 months with the pandemic, actually the wider society, the wider economy, the wider climate issues, all of that kind of stuff needs to be focused in and therefore balanced in that way. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. But some of the areas I wanted to focus in on in this particular section when we look at standards is how technology plays a big part in it. So actually having, particularly in teams, so creating good digital teams, as we've all experienced working remotely over the last 18 months, creating good digital teams needs good digital tools. So therefore you have to have the technology to make that work, which means you have to have the right kind of connectivity, which is different to what you may have had in the past. And so it's really important that organizations think about, actually, if I create a good service, it's of no use to me if I can't then allow people to collaborate around things. And we've seen a huge rise in collaborative tools, online tools. So, the platform we're using today, but also those kind of tools like Zoom and Microsoft Teams. Really important that people understand and have the confidence to use those things, which is another big area for us to make sure that it's not just about does the tech exist? It's can all of your users use that tech? Which is why we talk about things like solving a whole problem for users and making sure that we understand everyone's needs, which goes back to that strategic aim of inclusion. So you need to make sure that you cater for all levels of skills and capabilities when you're doing this kind of stuff. And probably most importantly for this session using the right data and technology. So scalable technologies that are also put in they're secure, that you respect people's privacy, and that you're not overstepping the boundaries when it comes to things like sharing and harvesting data, that kind of stuff. These are really important elements in a modern public service. We've seen, I mean, there's been some more stories today about cyber attacks, all of that kind of stuff. When people say digital's not about technology, it absolutely isn't only about technology, but it absolutely is really critical to making these services work, and building in those kind of things right up front, and making sure that you've solved those kind of problems and you choose the right kind of products. Public sector largely buys tech in Wales. We know, I don't know the exact, but in our experience, it's probably an 80-20 in terms of bought rather than built software solutions across Wales. And therefore ensuring that you understand commercially how to buy the right kind of tech, and not legacy tech. So technology that has cloud-based multi-licensed users rather than fixed desktops where you license a number of users in an office. That kind of stuff massively changes how you pay for these kind of services. But it all springs from what kind of technology you use. And therefore, having a good understanding about that tech landscape is critical. And data is another really important one. Where does the data go? How do I look after data? People are used to thinking about data security in terms of physical files. So, I mean, we still use that language when we work online. But, you know, it is very different in terms of, is it open data? What can I share? Where are my boundaries? And the natural public sector goal has always been to restrict use of data, but actually we can make data open now, which allows others, and in particular when we talk about the economy missions that the government has, how do we allow the private sector to also work on solutions that can make citizen services better? You know, and we've seen some great examples around making travel information open, and then that allows companies to build better travel options for us to understand about train times and bus timetables and all that kind of stuff. It's really simple things, but they're only made possible by the technology that exists. Next slide, please. So when we talk about digital and being user-led, when it comes to service design, the best example we've seen is to have this kind of view that talks about services at the top. What is a user trying to achieve? But we know that that is also shaped by outcomes that are wanted. And that's where we talk about maybe the user's trying to achieve something, but I want to influence that because I want to influence it with green issues, or I want to influence it with data sharing issues, those kind of questions. And they're all part of what shapes that outcome as part of people's strategies, missions, ethics, various policies and restrictions, legislation, often within public sector. And those things really shape what a user tries to do, but putting this user at the front of that process is really important. The second part of that supporting users is the infrastructure. So what technology you use, and in particular when we're talking about in this session, we're talking about that kind of technology and the systems and the data, and therefore they need to be scalable. They need to be as open as possible. They need to be as secure as possible. You know, and we talk about kind of issues like verification and identity. Those kind of things are always part of this. How many clicks before I can get to the service that I want? Do I really have to verify who I am to be able to do that transaction? And rather than it being a default option, all of that kind of thinking needs to go into the kind of infrastructure that makes these things work, as well as where we talk about things like inclusion. Is it available to everyone? You know, can everyone connect to the service? Does it have offline balance? And that's where I say it's not just about the technology, because you have to make these available to people with poor connections, or maybe back-end technologies aren't available 24/7 yet. legacy systems often support front-end digital services. So how do you build that into the technology, and how do you build that into your thinking right up front? And therefore that shapes the next one, which is about organization, how you structure to make this stuff work as well. And one of the bits that's most important about digital technologies is the ability to respond. Scalable digital technologies allow teams to be able to make changes fast. Users' needs change fast. Climate emergency brings a pace to things. We've started to see things have come to 2050, 2040, right? So we need to be able to move quickly to respond to those. So therefore, you need decision-making ability in your organization, governance arrangements, financial arrangements, procurement. How fast can you buy this stuff? The days of those long procurements that take 6 to 12 months to buy IT are long gone. In terms of being needed, there are options for people to do it a lot quicker, and the kinds of technology that you're buying and the commodities are making that possible. And then probably most importantly of all of them is the culture. So how do you then apply all the four things above? How do you apply those things in your organization? How do you allow people to make decisions, how to behave, how to be responsive, basing it on undertaking user research to find out what people really want to do is only half of the task. If you don't then allow your organization to respond and act on that research and deliver in an agile and incremental way, starting small, allowing experimentation to happen, that's when innovation starts to take place. You don't innovate by having months and months of planning exercises on functional requirements and stuff like that. So it's a change in the culture and the size of how you do those kind of projects that makes things work. And all of that really starts with having the right kind of technical capability to do that, whether yourself or whether you're working with partners to help you understand how to get there. Next slide, please. Just a piece on that last bit there. So when we talk about the user impact, and what we're looking for is positive outcomes for the greatest number of users, but also leaving nobody out of that. Also equally balanced off with achievements of strategic importance to the organization and your strategic goals. So as I mentioned, things like climate change. So is one of your goals to be, carbon neutral and all those kind of things? Actually, yeah, you can really make technical choices about your stack, about your technology stack, and how you green that technology stack. And there's lots of discussion about what that looks like and things, but it really does shape how you respond to those user needs and build the right kind of services. So it's really important that you understand those things and balance them against that user impact. And then the third part of this is about your organizational impact. So actually, can I do these things, and what impact does it have on my organization? I imagine there isn't an organization in Wales today that isn't suddenly working out, I'm not going back to my office, I'm not going back to face-to-face services, I'm not going back to big call centers and telephony. People want to self-serve. They've worked from home or they've had a balance. They want to have that choice. So what kind of organization am I, and what am I going to do with that based on what people want to do versus what I can do and how quickly I can do it and the kind of goals I want to achieve. So all of those things need to be balanced when you're making the kind of technical choices around how you deliver this kind of stuff. Next slide, please. So there are some tools and techniques that we wanted to touch upon. So this is, I know the context is quite small, but you can get the gist of it. We talk about service blueprints. So number one, you will not, anybody listening, you probably won't be surprised to know that most organizations don't actually know what services they provide. They can't tell you with any specific knowledge about the exact nature of all of the things that they do. So one of the things that we often ask people to do is create that service blueprint, starting, as we've talked about, all the way through. What is that customer's journey? What are they trying to achieve? And we've got some really great examples of that over the last even the last 12 months, we found, working with social care teams, where does the service start? And they say, oh, when somebody makes an appointment with a social worker. And you say, well, actually, no, it usually starts when somebody's had an accident or has fallen ill. And actually their first protocol might have been a hospital or a GP. And so the social worker connection is probably a second, third, or fourth action. So your customer may have already provided the same information 2 or 3 times. And we often, because of the way public services in particular are siloed off, people don't quite always understand where they are in that cycle and why some users are already frustrated with the process. They may well already been in it for weeks by the time they encounter you. So it's really important that people understand that full journey and the role that they then play in that journey. So it might just be a contact center that does fulfillment areas within a process, but it's really important that they understand what role they play. And in this context, the technology side of things plays a part in that first interaction. So that front stage interaction and that first line of contact, be it via the different technologies that we're talking about, be it via telephony, video call, or web, email, mobile apps, any of those things. They're all different technologies are really important in providing it, and you have to have the right options that work for your users. And finding out the kinds of people they are and what they want to do through user research and persona-driven development. Below the line, you start to see that backstage stuff, that line of visibility where your users should never be exposed because they don't want to know what your database does or whatever. But often you'll see that people say, well, why does it take 3 or 4 weeks to do this? Actually, because we've got clunky systems in the back, or we've got policy checks, or all of that kind of stuff that happens that they don't see happening. So if you can understand that, you can start to speed up those processes in the back by smarter use of technology, or by even just explaining to your customers, this will take 3 weeks because I've got to do X, Y, and Z. So I'll give you updates when things happen. So that reduces the burden on them having to keep chasing, thinking I was going to get this in 5 minutes, because users' expectations have changed so much. If I send an email or a Snapchat message or anything like that, I expect responses in minutes. Whereas when I used to fill in a form or write a letter, I knew it would take me 6 to 10 weeks. So having this blueprint really allows you to understand how technology enables the pace at which your user journey can be shaped. And next slide, please. So I'll introduce my colleague Ross now, who's going to start to talk about digital transformation. Is it about technology and how it fits in and how it works? So I'll hand over to Ross, and we can take any questions you've got. We can pick up at the end of the session.
Thanks, Tim. So just to do a quick intro about myself, my name is Ross, and I'm one of the directors at Perago. So my background is in agile user-centered change delivery, mainly in the public sector, and I spend time working with teams to help facilitate better user-centered services that meet user need. So I just wanted to pick up on a couple of themes that Tim has mentioned. So we often say that digital transformation in the public sector is not just about technology. And as we've just discussed, technology is clearly a critical enabler in that process. But the primary driver behind us making this statement really is to emphasize that smart use of technology is not necessarily an end in itself. And we need to make sure that we focus on the people whose needs we're looking to meet and the services we're looking to deliver. So it's very clear that the possibilities that the use of technology and data can unlock are endless, but without a sort of a clear framework to help focus our thinking, we run the risk of not being very successful. So we need to create a delivery structure that is multidisciplinary. It includes technologists alongside business and digital delivery skills, and involves the people who will benefit from the change right from the start of the delivery process, and that's the users. And listening to users and understanding their needs means that we'll then be better placed to define a responsive solution that has the best chance of realizing the outcomes and benefits that we're looking to achieve for citizens and broader society. So we've touched on Agile in a little bit of the previous slides. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail and user-centered design. So for those that aren't familiar with the use of Agile to deliver digital public services, Agile is a way to manage projects where you make sure what you do meets that user needs, tries to deliver value early, and then manages risk through incremental delivery. So the idea behind Agile is to create a continuous learning environment for the team, which allows you to move through the different phases, do something small, see it being used by people, and then adapt it based on what you've learned. So you might find that some of the critical assumptions about the thing that you have up front, whether that's a product or a service, were wrong. So this process allows you to not wait till the very end to get that feedback when it's too late to do anything about it, and to try and address that in a more incremental and controlled way. So in summary, working in an Agile way allows you to sort of experiment and learn rapidly, continuously deliver value in small chunks, and get value out to people early. So you may not have delivered the whole thing up front, but you can start realizing benefits earlier and get feedback as you do more things. And it allows you to then better respond to changing requirements and needs throughout that process. So as you learn new stuff, the Agile methodology sort of gives you an opportunity to adapt and to change that. And I think that's a really important point, because you can't necessarily know everything up front, and Agile gives you a mechanism to respond to that changing requirement as emerging needs occur. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the delivery methodology that we use with our clients at Perago. So the discovery, alpha, beta, live method of managing Agile projects is used by central government or UK central government and much broader now as well, to help think about user-centered digital services. But it's also a framework that I like to use to think about any project that I work on, really. So it doesn't have to be strictly about digital change. So the process of problem solving, prototyping, and iterating based on user need, I think, is just as valid for anything. And I mentioned a bit earlier about the value of that multidisciplinary effort. And this is where that starts, really, right at the beginning of the discovery phase. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of each one of these stages. So in the discovery phase, you're really looking to understand the context of the problem to solve. So this is where you'd look to explore a number of the key questions. So things like, what are we trying to do and why? Is there actually a problem here to solve? Who are the users? What are they trying to do? And do we have the right technical building blocks to solve the problem? And what are our constraints and opportunities in this space? It's worth calling out that during discovery, you might learn that the problem that you've been exploring isn't really a thing. So you should stop. And this is a perfectly valid response at the end of discovery. You don't really want to waste time, effort, and money progressing with something that isn't going to get the outcome that you're looking for. So assuming in discovery that we have identified that there's a real problem to solve, then alpha is looking at how we actually solve that problem. So in alpha, we look to explore different ways that you could achieve something through design and technical prototypes, and you'll be testing things with real users. So alpha is about testing all those riskiest assumptions that you have about the project early, so you can be sure that the solution that you arrive at is a sound one. And alpha sort of ends when you understand all the different solutions that you could possibly deliver, and then you have defined a way forward that meets user need. Again, stopping at alpha phase is a perfectly valid response. And if the thing that you've explored is not hitting the mark, then this is an opportunity to call that out and revisit the problem, just to make sure that we are actually driving that value, both for the public sector and for the user. So thinking about beta, this is really where you start to build the thing for real users. So this is where you start your incremental delivery process. You'll still research and you'll test and you'll iterate, but there's going to be less room for maneuver at this point because you've chosen your path. So during the beta, you're more than likely, or you will be confident, I should say, that you sort of fully understand the problem. You've tested your different options to be able to meet that problem. You understand the technical design for the solution, and you've mitigated as much risk as possible, and you're on the right path. So that doesn't mean that things won't necessarily change. So it's important to think then about how things can be broken down into smaller increments. So that piece I mentioned about releasing value early, it's about saying, okay, yeah, so we recognize we're on the right path. But things still might change. So let's break that down into smaller chunks, release that value, learn from that, and then sort of use that to assess whether we're remaining on the right path. And I guess this allows you to continually assess whether something is meeting the intended user need and the value of the ongoing investment remains sound. And then finally, live. So live just means the service or the thing that you've delivered is now the official way of doing something. So often in government, new services are replacing an old way of doing something. And it might mean that if you have an old service still running, you need to transition to the new one to be the main channel. So it's worth noting, I guess, across the whole diagram that it does look quite linear, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So you don't have to move to alpha if you don't think you're answering the right questions in discovery. But the good thing is you haven't spent a lot of time and money in, building something and getting that to a point where it can be released. And equally in alpha, if you don't think your preferred way forward is not meeting user need, you can stop and reconsider that. And again, you haven't spent a significant amount of time, because these stages are time boxed, or money in building something before you get to that decision point. So just to recap, thinking about a change in this way can help reduce the risk of building the wrong thing that doesn't meet user need, allow the team to get useful feedback on something throughout the process, and creates a continuous learning environment that allows the team to better respond to changing or emerging needs. So I think it's really important that a digital change sets off on the right foot before jumping straight into building something, but to do that in a way that's inclusive and test thinking before really committing to a solution. So over the next few slides, I wanted to talk about some of the key things to consider during the discovery and alpha phase, and hopefully provide some insight in terms of how some of the things that we've talked about so far can be applied in practice. So the first thing I want to talk about is understanding the problem. So before you commit to doing something, you need to understand or fully understand the problem that needs to be solved. And the discovery phase aligns nicely really with the concept of user-centered service design, and it gives the team the opportunity to spend some time really defining the problem before designing the solution for it. And I think the key point being, the more exactly that you can define the problem or understand the problem, the more suitable you can design the solution to that problem. And this means learning about things like your users and what they're trying to achieve, any constraints you'd face making the changes. So for example, technology, policy, or any other factors, the underlying policy intent that you've been set up to address, meaning the thing that government wants to change or make happen, and opportunities to improve things. So from a technology perspective, that might mean looking for opportunities to shift from legacy technologies and think about solutions that are more scalable and loosely coupled. And again, this might be an incremental journey, much like that user experience piece as well. I think one of the key challenges when thinking about the problem is that the starting point for projects is not always framed clearly or in a user-centered way. So I think the first task is to understand the full context of what we're actually trying to do. So we need to make sure that we're solving the right problem. And this may sound a little bit trivial, but it's actually fundamental to help make sure that we're driving the right outcomes. So I find that when we think about the problem or problem solving, generally speaking, people's brains are trained to fix the problem straight away, to get to a solution as quickly as possible. But there's a couple of things to be mindful of here, I think. And I think if we do that, how can we be sure that we're solving the right problem? Has that problem been accurately identified in the first place? And is that thing that we want to do actually treating the symptom rather than the cause? So in a lot of cases, when we look at solving a problem, we start with a solution before we really understand the challenge. So as an example, the statement here says we need to build an app for staff to manage their annual leave. And there may be a number of reasons why we end up with a statement like this, including things like we've already bought the capability, so we need to make sure that we use it. Everybody else is using this new shiny thing, so we must get in on the action as well. And this is what our teams know how to do, so we should use their skills. I think before we get into that, there's a number of questions we can use to help challenge this statement and ensure that we are actually getting to the core of the problem. So some of those things might be right, But actually, I think there's a process that we need to go through first, and there's a number of questions that we can ask. The first one being, who are the users? So in this instance, this might be staff working for a fictional company, or they're the line managers of those staff. We might then ask, well, what are they actually trying to do? So the staff might need to book leave, cancel leave, see their entitlement. Managers might need to ensure that they've got enough people in and ensure that the staff are taking their leave. We might want to ask, what's our motivation and why now? So it might be that there's no process for booking leave or seeing people, or seeing when people are off. It's not clear how much entitlement is left. It's hard to see whether leave is being used in the most effective way for staff and the business as well. Is this part of a broader service? So what are the other systems, processes, technologies the staff have to use? For example, they might also have to put their leave in their calendar, in Outlook. And a question like this helps to understand that broader context in terms of how this service or solution will be operating. We want to ask ourselves, what outcomes do we want to achieve? So in this case, it might be to save staff time from dealing with existing clunky or manual processes, reduce the misuse of leave, so ensure operational efficiency and that we have enough people to meet the needs of our users. And then finally, what are our key metrics? So how are we going to measure the success of this change? So the things that we can use or measure to see if the problem is improving. So in this case, it might be operational efficiency, or if enough staff are in and the teams are operating effectively, or staff or user satisfaction. So removing frustration from the process. So considering that, a better way forward might be to define this as a question that we can explore in a bit more detail. So something like, how might we make it easier for staff to take their annual leave while reducing operational issues from low staffing levels? So this statement or question covers the outcome we're looking to achieve and not the solution. So it may be that in order to effectively deliver against the outcomes that we've discovered, by asking these questions, there may be a different solution that's not an app, or it might actually validate the earlier assumption and builds confidence then in the preferred way forward. So I think it can be difficult. Sometimes, obviously, it might be that a public service would be bigger than a staff app, and it might be difficult sometimes to challenge some of these preconceived ideas about the right way forward, as there may be some strong opinions about something or business pressures that need to be addressed. But I think that framing the question correctly and backing that up, or backing that decision up with evidence through things like user research, is important to ensure that the solution's treating the actual cause of the issue and not just sort of the symptom. So we've considered some questions as discussed on the previous slide, but doing user research, and Tim touched on this as well, is really critical to framing and validating the problem. So in the discovery phase, what we're looking to achieve, or the objective of user research really, is to learn about the potential users of the service and what they need to achieve. So this is fundamental in helping to decide whether it's worth continuing trying to solve a problem and how you should go about it, whether you need to think about something new, or whether there are things that already exist that you could reuse to meet that defined need. So key point to note in this process is that you need to leave your personal assumptions about user need aside. So in this case, you're not the user, you are not the user. You may have been a user at some point, but when you're looking to understand the full set of needs, you're not designing the solution around your thinking or the people in the business thinking about the service. You're looking to understand the needs of the full set of user personas and the challenges within each one of those journeys. And it's also important to call out there's a big difference between user need and user wants. So we're not really thinking about what a user wants out of a thing that we're doing. We're more interested in what they need to get to the final outcome. And needs exist across a number of different layers. So just as a quick summary, we've got things like stated needs, so what the user say or says that they need to do. We've got intrinsic needs, so what users assume we're doing for them without saying it out loud. So things like, I want my information to be kept safe and secure. Created needs, so result from a specific approach that we've taken in designing a service. So in relation to border controls, the need might be, I need a passport. And then more broadly, societal needs. So these are the broad needs that everybody in society has. So things like, I want to feel safe, or I want to be safe. So thinking a little bit about what user research can tell us, it can also allow us to understand users' needs, tasks and goals, and really the journey from their perspective and any pain points within the existing arrangements. It can also help us to understand what they expect and their attitudes and behaviours to a particular thing. And I think this can be really useful when thinking about the potential solutions to a problem, and then how changes in organization structure, processes, or the way that technology works for the user can really help to remove some of those barriers and pain points that users face when trying to complete a task, in essence. And just a very brief introduction to different types of user research. So we can do user research that allows us to learn about people through understanding more about their lives. And this type of research means that we can paint the big picture and understand more about the outcomes that we need to meet. So we can do this by things like interviews and listening to their experience, observing them interact with different elements of their life, and taking key insights from our discussions with them and identifying themes and patterns as we speak to more and more people. And this gives us some really good context then in terms of defining that problem and then thinking about what solutions we might need to define to solve that problem. And on the other side, then we can go into testing a service. So this is a type of research around testing ideas. So it might be in the form of different prototypes or approaches to problems. And this means that we can get feedback on something that we built or proposing to build, and then fine tune that to better meet user need. And this allows us to find and fix problems before we get into full scale development and rolling stuff out to a wider audience. So again, just to cover some of this benefits of doing user research as part of the discovery phase, it'll allow you to figure out what needs to be done before we start doing it, understand a bit more about the big choices that we need to make before sinking money into them, and help us frame problems from a user's perspective. So validate our decision making, and importantly, secure buy-in from the organization to our chosen way forward. So just a point to note that during the discovery phase, you'll do stuff like user research, you'll analyze it, you'll learn about internal systems, processes and constraints. And at some point you'll, in the discovery, that has to end and you'll need to make a decision about what to do next. So you'll need to start thinking about, do you have evidence that the original problem that you set out to explore exists and is still worth solving? Will the benefit of solving the problem outweigh the costs associated with continuing? Is there a different problem that we've uncovered that is worth looking at instead? Or is there nothing to be improved and the project should be stopped? Another key question is, how do you know that you've done enough research to make this decision? So you'll know when you've done enough, when you start to observe patterns, you're confident that you've got enough information to make a decision, and you stop learning new things, either from your analysis of the business or your insight with users. So assuming we found enough evidence, then we need to think about the possible solutions and how they meet both user and business goals. And it may be at this point we have to start thinking about what the design of that technical architecture looks like. And some of that may involve fixing things like the underlying technology first to enable services and ensure these key building blocks are sort of in place. And that sort of ensures then that enabling activity is part of the digital journey and that overarching change narrative. So in the discovery phase, we've spent some time understanding the problem from a user's perspective, the wider context of the organization, its processes, and the potential technical solutions we could implement to help meet user need. And in the alpha phase, we'll be looking to test some of the thinking in a way that is tangible and that we can evolve as we discover what works and what doesn't work, and as we narrow down to our preferred solution. And this will certainly involve more user research and user testing, and the creation of various different prototypes to allow us to visualize and interact with the preferred solution or the proposed solution. So just as a quick summary, a prototype is a simulation of how a finished product will work, and it allows a product team to test the usability and feasibility of the design of a service and make sure that it meets user needs, And this will really help to make sure that the service works from a user's perspective and allows them to interact with something before we fully commit to building it. So during the alpha phase, we'll also complete a number of technical prototypes. So in alpha, we'll start thinking about the technical design of a solution, and then maybe some challenges that could create risk for us further down the line. So the alpha phase is a good opportunity for us to call out these risks and try and mitigate them as much as possible up front. So for example, it may involve doing a thin slice of integration across a number of different solution components to prove that one thing can talk effectively to another thing, or to demonstrate a technical process that hasn't necessarily been implemented before. So it may not necessarily be usable from a business perspective, and it also will lack some of the complexity of the final solution, but it could help to better manage risk and prove a concept before committing further. So there's a number of reasons that we would prototype, and that's to communicate an idea or to prove a concept, to learn about a design and the way that we're starting to put something together. And when it comes to testing with users, creating prototypes based on what we want to learn helps us design out risk in that front-end experience. So when thinking about the service and the user journey, low fidelity prototyping is a good place to start, as it's pretty low cost and requires no or limited technical skills up front. So this is a good approach early on in a project, as this is where there are more unknowns and risk areas within the design. So they're easy to change and learn more about before committing something or making something more elaborate. And this can involve things like paper sketching, or storyboards, which can help draw out the steps within a service to help people understand the end-to-end concept and make changes much more quickly and easily. It's another really good opportunity for that whole team to understand the end-to-end journey and call out to any challenges within their respective disciplines. So I've talked about multidisciplinary teams on previous slides, and again, this is another opportunity to get that team together. And when thinking about an overall process from a technology perspective, when we understand the journey from a business and customer perspective, that might draw out any insight around technical constraints or anything like that up front that will add risk to the overall solution that we can then test out and make sure that we can manage that risk through a technical prototype or spike. So as things become a little more clear, you can increase the fidelity of the prototype and start to develop clickable prototypes or wireframes, which can help stitch things together, particularly the transition between steps and test different scenarios within the journey. And it's worth noting there's various design tools which you can fairly easily create clickable prototypes, things that you can download from Google and whatnot. And also, I guess the clickable prototype approach allows you to be able to keep developing the designs of the pages or parts of the service that you're looking to build and get more and more feedback from users. And then you can start to get closer and closer to the finished designs of the service before you actually start coding something for real. So I just wanted to say a few words on testing prototypes with users, and it's really important to understand the different types of users that you want to prototype with, using personas, trying to get a really clear view of all the different elements of a particular persona or user type and the journey that they might actually need to go on. So when we are testing with those different personas, it's important to note really that we're not looking for task completion and understanding of the service. We're looking at what things they need to do to be able to complete that particular journey, and not necessarily their preference. We'll be asking people to show us how they would complete a particular task rather than saying how they would want to do it, because this really isn't about market research. No one is keen on using public services, but we can make it a good experience by finding out what works for everyone and then trying to keep that simple. So another key element is content. So content is critical to ensure that the service works for people. So we need to pay attention to language and the words that we use to ensure users understand what's going on within the service without necessarily being verbally prompted by the tester or the user researcher. And as our prototypes become a bit higher in fidelity, people can normally understand and click through the different steps within the journey, but we need to make sure that they understand where they've come from, what they've done, and then what will happen next within that overall approach. And we also need to be clear that we're not testing them, we're testing the design of the solution, and we need to have our users think out loud so that we can understand their thought process and use that insight to evolve that service a bit further. One of the key elements that we need to consider, and I think this has been touched on a number of the slides in the previous deck, so we need to make sure that we've tested the accessibility of our service with users. So there's usually no alternative to using public services, and they have to work for everyone. So you should really design the service to be inclusive, making sure that everybody that needs to use it can do so, and they can do so as easily as possible. There are a couple of legal duties to note. So the Equality Act 2010 highlights that we shouldn't be excluding protected groups from access in public services. And the Public Sector Body's Accessibility Regulations 2018 highlights that we need to ensure that digital services conform to a consistent standard, a consistent standard of accessibility, that is. And we've touched on this before in terms of Welsh language, but it is particularly relevant to public services in Wales. So we know services have to comply with the Welsh Language Act, but we can try and start to shift the balance away from compliance. The same with accessibility, really, and really understand the need that underpins Welsh language users or the user experience when they're using public services. And from a technology perspective, when considering things like Welsh language, there's loads of work, or loads of great work, I should say, being done by Hello Blod, which are part of Welsh Government, on Welsh language technology. And they've developed loads of Welsh language software components, like tools that can help correct Welsh language spelling and grammar. And these can all be used for free, in essence, and you can just download them from their site. So that about wraps up the presentation part of the session, and now it's time to see if you have any questions.
Yeah, we had when you slipped into a vortex, Ross, we had 2 minutes for questions to come in.
Okay.
So I don't think there were any questions that popped into the chat, so that probably just leaves us time to thank everyone for listening in. And as I said earlier, if you got any questions or things you wanted to follow up with us in any detail, please just get in touch. And as I mentioned earlier, the ways you can get in touch with us. So thanks very much for listening to us and bearing with some of the technical difficulties. Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time. Cheers.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.